Hi, this is Kris Castro, and this is the Lead Upside Down podcast, where leaders are sharing how they are leading in non-traditional ways based on Jesus's leadership style. If you have any questions, go back to the trailer episode and that should answer them. But right now, grab your favorite beverage and settle in. If you have any questions or comments, especially if something resonates with you, feel free to go to my website, begin2shift.com, and set up a coffee and conversation meeting, and we can chat about it in more detail. All right, enjoy. Hey, everybody, this is Kris Castro with the Lead Upside Down podcast. And I am excited to have Catherine Davis here. We are new friends. We've only known each other for a couple of months. And she is an amazing lady. She has an organization called the Restoration Project. And in our conversation about leading upside down, she'll probably tell you a little bit about it. So great to see you again, Catherine. It's been a little bit.
It's good to see you, Kris. Absolutely.
So I always ask my guests two questions when we start the podcast. What does Lead Upside Down mean to you, and how has Lead Upside Down affected your life and work?
Leading, excuse me, upside down means actually putting myself in the hands of the Lord to be responsive to what He would have me to do. So it goes against the grain. I remember many years ago, people accused me of swimming against the tide, right? Like the salmon, they were like, you're always going against, you're always opposite. And I'm like, but I'm following the word of God. So yeah, I probably am swimming against the tide. I'm probably leading upside down. That's what it means to me.
And the last question that I have for you before we roll into the bigger, deeper conversation is, what advice would you give others who are either trying to lead upside down for the first time or who might have been doing it for a while but want to do it better?
My common phrase that I use all the time is that the safest place to be is in the hands of the Lord. And if we are doing what we believe He's told us to do, right, then paying attention to that, not to all of the white noise that's around us, because there's always going to be people who are going to disagree, who are going to want to push back against whatever the topic is you may be discussing or living out. So as long as you're sure that you are doing what God told you to do, then that's my advice. Do that. Don't do what the culture says. Don't do, what your family says per se, or your neighbor or your friends. What did God say? Do that.
Yes, indeed. Catherine, do you have anything you want to share about your next event or anything before we go to the deeper conversation?
Oh, sure. I am on Monday. Today is what, October the 4th. On Monday, I am putting up a series of billboards in Georgia, North Carolina, and Virginia to call people's attention to the fact that when you're addressing the life issue, we are talking about little people. So the first billboard is literally a picture of beautiful little chocolate babies, and it says, I have a right to exist. It's inalienable. The second billboard is of moms. One is pregnant, one is holding her newborn infant, and one is holding her toddler. And it says, I am not my mother's body. And the third one is a gift box that you can see into. And it says, we should not return the gift of life unopened. My heart is that people will begin to think of children in the womb as people and afford them the protection that all persons are afforded through the Constitution.
Mhm. Thank you for that. Well, Catherine, you and I had a conversation maybe, I think it was like 5 or 6 weeks ago, all about what you're doing and the passions the Lord has put on your heart. And I knew from that conversation that you definitely lead upside down. And I would love for you to share a little bit with the audience about how the Lord positioned you to lead upside down within your sphere of influence. And the risks you've taken along the way, because that's part of leading upside down.
Amen. Well, I, many, many, many years ago, had two abortions. And I was like Scarlett O'Hara. I'll think about that tomorrow, So I kind of put it on a shelf in my brain, determined not to address it, just leave it there, right? And I moved to Richmond, Virginia, and found this church. It was a small church that met in what was formerly a car dealership. And they did a program every Tuesday that they called Noondays. And instead of eating food, you went to a Bible study to eat the word, right? So I go bouncing into this Bible study. I'm all happy. Ooh, Bible study. And I walk in the door, and the topic of the day was abortion. And it was like Holy Spirit was saying to me, today's the day, girlfriend. You got to deal with it. Take it off the shelf. Well, I was like a deer in the headlights because I'm like, well, if I leave, they're going to know. If I stay, they're going to know. So what do I do? And I kind of just slid into a seat and cried the entire time. To this day, I cannot tell you one thing those men said because the whole time I was just weeping and they recognized my distress. And one got on one side of me, the other got on the other side of me, and they began to pray. And then that became the Catherine Davis comedy show because I kept trying to leave. Okay, thank you. And they kept pushing me back down in the chair. Okay, thank you. And they pushed me down. And they prayed for me until they got a release that I was going to be okay. And then one of them went in his office and got this book um, called Grand Delusions, The Legacy of Planned Parenthood. It was written by a pastor named George Grant. And he told me, put the book in my hand and said, read this and go do something about it. And that is what launched me on the pro-life trail. Over the years, I've come to see that there's all kinds of forces coming against the family, beginning with life, but also the entire family structure has been impacted by these cultural norms that allow women to sleep with multiple men, that pit the wife or the partner against the man. I mean, and so my ministry has grown to include doing forums and education sessions to educate about the family, the importance of mom and dad, the importance of education and teaching our children not only to read and write, but to critically think. So that's what the Restoration Project does today. I'm very, very pro-life. My ministry is to end abortion in America, to recognize the personhood of children in the womb. Because if we do that, we then have equal protection and due process for those children, but also to restore the family, to put the ancient boundaries back that our fathers had set that protected the family. So,
Yeah, I want to dig into that a little bit more because that's the real reason that we were introduced is we were trying to figure out with the city impact movement that we're initiating, where are the felt needs in the city And how can we come alongside people who are working in those lanes? And you really have taken the family to heart. And you've got a great story about how you believe and feel that the reinstitution of the family is going to make people thrive and prosper, and things are just going to kind of come back into place. And I'm wondering if you can, from the lead upside down perspective, can you share a little bit of that journey of how you've led upside down in that lane and what it's looked like for you to do so?
I grew up in the projects, not the projects as we think of them today. They were really very decent places to live. But my mom and dad were together until they died, right? So my family experience, I think, is different than most of the young people that we're talking to today who grow up in single parent households. So they don't know the benefits of having dad there, dad as the protector, dad as the priest in the household. And it makes me sad because my dad, he was a wonderful protector. I have funny stories about my dad protecting me. But people who don't have that experience, they don't know. Now, I'm a single parent myself. I have two children, and I realized uh further along in the journey, because I was woman, hear me roar. I don't need a man. I can raise my children myself. Well, what I realized was one, I couldn't teach my son how to be a man. Only a man can do that. I couldn't teach my daughter appropriate interactions with a man. She needed her dad to teach her, no, you don't press your body against a man's body if you're dancing with them, or you don't allow people to touch you. You know what I'm saying? And so I lamented having that for my children because they didn't have the same measure of protection that I had. Now, saying that in this society today labels me. I'm anti-feminist, I'm anti-woman. A woman, should have bodily autonomy, and everything I'm saying goes against that notion. And talking about strength, having the strength to recognize where you're weak, to recognize where the holes are and then fill those holes. But that tends to bring a lot of rejection, a lot of ad hominem attacks. Um, but because I am in the perfect will of God doing this fight, it doesn't hit me as hard as perhaps it might some who have been so weakened by our culture today, because our culture has denied women in particular and our men the strength and the courage to take a stand for what's right, what's true. Truth is uniform, fixed, and universal. It doesn't change from person to person. Truth is truth. Truth is Jesus, right?
Mhm.
But, you've got to be strong. You can't be thin-skinned and do this work. You can't be thin-skinned and do any work the Lord has called you to, because it's like Jesus said, I didn't come to unify. I came with a sword. I'm going to divide mother against children, father against children, children against parents, because of the work that he says we're to do. So,
Yeah. And a lot of people take that verse and they kind of twist it, thinking that it's anarchy. And it's really not about
no,
anarchy and
not a,
about the consequences of truth. Because when a truth is brought to the table, there are people who are going to align and there are people who are going to reject, and that brings division, which is
yes,
so evident in our culture today
yes,
because we are so divisive, unfortunately. We have
Mhm.
stopped learning and understanding and being willing to have discussions rather than conflict over disagreements. And yes,
And over things we have no control over. For example, you didn't get to stand before the throne and say to God, well, I want to be Caucasian. I don't want to be Black or Latin or, Middle Eastern or whatever. God decided. He planted us in the families that He wanted us to have. And so we fight each other over something that we had nothing to do with and that we can't change, right? I can't change from being Black, a Black American. And here lately, I've come to understand and appreciate better what it means to be a Black American. The culture took a people group from a bunch of different tribes from a whole different continent. So you weren't the 388,000 slaves that landed here. They weren't family. They didn't all come from the same tribes or the same nations or anything. They were thrown together, and yet we survived. Yet we made America a culture of our own. Black Americans are unlike Blacks from any other nation around the world. And we don't recognize that. We kind of lump everybody into this cauldron, and it's just not true. But the strength of will, the intelligence that it took to survive the Middle Passage, to survive slavery, to survive Jim Crow, right? Took great courage and strength to stand up and say, this is who we are. We are Americans. We're a part of this culture and we're here to stay, right?
yeah,
So I want to bring that back and celebrate who we are. I loved growing up with my family in the projects, with my friends. I had a great childhood. Great, great childhood. My dad was his today's version of Gadget Man. If there was a thing, he was gonna have it, right? So we were the first family to have a stereo. Do you remember when the
I
stereos were these
do.
huge pieces of furniture, right? We had the first color TV in the neighborhood. We had the first 10 speed bikes because he wanted his girls to be able to fly, right? So I had a great childhood, and it was not a childhood of deprivation. In fact, I didn't know I was poor until I went to college. Right? I didn't. I had no concept because my dad and my mother believed we're going to give you what you need and occasionally we'll supplement it with what you want. But it came, as a part of a regard for family, not for the things that that we were getting. And I just wish every child in America could have that experience because it was a great experience.
Yeah, it reminds me, and I think I've mentioned this on a previous podcast, but it reminds me very much of, the old Western or really rural homesteads where there was a finite amount of people that lived in an area. And because they all shared similar values, they were able to take care of each other. They went
Yeah,
out of their way if somebody lacked to give. Divorce was not a common occurrence
no,
back there. And I'm not saying that divorce is always wrong. I'm simply saying that it wasn't the first stop for a marriage issue. People used to try and work through their issues before just going, I'm done, be gone
right.
you know. So today we're bearing the consequences of the last generation or two's decisions. And I
Yes,
think you're older than me. So your generation had far less divorce, our generation, there were some single kids and issues and that kind of thing. But our generation was the one that started divorcing at a very high rate. And then it just trickled down from there. And that's just sad.
Because my generation opened the door to rebellion against cultural norms. We were the ones who were making love, not war. We were burning our bras. We were doing all of the things to disrupt. What was amazing to me was discovering things like some of it was very intentional. The National Organization of Women, when they were forming, they had a meeting in upstate New York. I believe it was in like 1969. And they did this call and response thing. Why are we here? To make revolution. What kind of revolution? A cultural revolution. And how do we make this revolution? We destroy the American family. How do we destroy the family? By destroying uh, the American patriarch. How do we destroy the patriarch? By destroying monogamy. And how do we destroy monogamy? Through promiscuity, homosexuality, eroticism, and prostitution. So, literally, the National Organization of Women sent women into the culture to break down the family structure, to destroy the family, to use their bodies as weapons against the family. And they've succeeded. So it's amazing to me today when the Me Too movement started, it was deliberate. It was done by women in the National Organization of Women and all of the organizations they were partnering with to sell a lifestyle that would disrupt the American culture as we knew it. And gosh, how I wish we could go back and put the boundaries back because now there's it's abominable what's happening in our culture. There is no discussion of family. We have so belittled our men that they don't feel like they can have a say, right? So now we have passport bros who are going overseas to find their wives because American women have so destroyed their manhood, their desires, other than sex, they don't feel they have a purpose or a place. And that's what the Restoration Project is looking to restore. Can we appreciate our men? Not all men are running around trying to sleep with 100 women. Not all men don't want to have a wife and children, the house with the picket fence, right? And can we bring back a degree of respect for the family and harmony for the family? That's my goal.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Catherine. This has been great. Will you please tell people how they can get a hold of you and whatever else you want to say before we wrap up today?
Yeah, they can reach me at therestorationproject.life. So Catherine at therestorationproject.life. Visit my website. I'd love to have you root around in there. In fact, I'm getting ready to update it quite a bit. And reach out to me if you want to get engaged. I'm looking for an army. I'm going to leave you with this picture. I don't know if you've seen the movie The Woman King with Viola Davis,
Mhm.
which I consider to be one of the most pro-life movies ever. But um, there was a female army, and there were men too, but the lead were the females, and they were fierce in protecting their culture and protecting their king. What would happen if we formed an army of believers to protect our King, King Jesus, that are going to take a stand together and not waver and compromise on family, on life, on issues that are important to us. So in the movie, they were called the Agoge. I am looking for some Agoge, men and women, that we will stand together and push back against the forces that are destroying our culture and our lives here in America.
Wow. Thank you again. And for those of you that are watching, I'm going to put all of Catherine's information in the show notes. You can feel free to reach out to her. And as usual, if you ever want to get a hold of me to learn to lead upside down or to learn a little bit more about the Greater Atlanta Christian Chamber of Commerce, the website's on the picture behind me. Feel free to do that as well. So thanks, everybody. And don't forget to lead upside down. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks so much for hanging out and enjoying the Lead Upside Down podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. And remember, wherever you are, you can lead upside down too, just like Jesus did. Feel free to reach out to me if you want more information or if you think I can serve you in some way. Just go to my website, begin2shift.com, and click on the coffee and conversation icon and set that meeting up. Have a fantastic rest of your day.